Om Jnana Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Dena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistang Stapitang Jaina Bhutale Sayang Rupa Kadamayang Dadati Sapatantikam Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Maivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhana Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So before I start, I just want to say hello to Manasi Ganga Mataji. It is because of Manasi Ganga that I've come to join you today. I feel very privileged and very honored that she's invited me. Manasi Ganga and I go back to the 80s at Bhaktivedanta Manor, and she's like big buddies with my wife. Just come and say hello, Prema. Come and say hello.
Haribol.
I will, Manasi. Prema Leela and Manasi Ganga are big buddies from Bhaktivedanta Manor in the 80s and 90s. So I just because of her, that we're coming.
Can I share? We were there. We were very much shloka friends, also sharing shlokas. Especially, she would inspire me to learn more shlokas.
She's still doing that, Manasi. You know, still doing that to the different god sisters and other devotees. Manasi Ganga, thank you very much for inviting me. I feel so privileged. Thank you. I hope I can do justice to your group. So we're going to talk about fourth chapter a little bit. Mataji was saying you're on 426. But when we speak about Bhagavad Gita verses, it's good to understand the context. Because sometimes one speaker just takes one verse, we may lose the connection to the previous verses. So that's very important to understand the context properly. So this chapter is transcendental knowledge. So there are different kinds of knowledge, actually. For instance, you know, some of you may know how to bake a cake. That's knowledge. Some of you, I don't know where about you are in the world, but if you break down on the freeway, you may need to know how to change your tire. That's knowledge. If you're looking at us on Zoom, you must have uploaded it to a computer at one point. That's also knowledge. But the knowledge that Krishna is talking about in this chapter is a little different. That is called transcendental knowledge, actually. Transcendental, actually, that originally comes from the Latin. It means that which lies beyond. So what lies beyond this world is the spiritual world. So it is that knowledge which Krishna is discussing, the knowledge of the spiritual world. And more specifically, the knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, the knowledge of ourselves as jivas, and the relationship between them. Because this is the only knowledge which is really worth anything. We are in the mundane world and we're absorbed with so many things that we think are knowledge. But it really isn't so important, actually, because whatever knowledge we have from this life, when we change bodies, that knowledge will be lost. But this transcendental knowledge, that is eternal, that will go on. So this is what Krishna is discussing, transcendental knowledge. Because when we have transcendental knowledge, we have information about how we can act. Because we're currently in the material sky, in the material world, and we're influenced by that material world, but we don't belong here, actually. So in order that we can become free from this world and return to the spiritual world where we belong, we need that transcendental knowledge. So Krishna is discussing in Bhagavad Gita, actually in different ways, about that transcendental knowledge, that knowledge which will enable us actually to get out of this realm. We're in the material sky and we're engaged materially, but we need to be able to get out. So how to do that, actually? That means that the material things that are around us, we have to learn to use that actually in Krishna's service, so that it's no longer material then, it becomes spiritual. Srila Prabhupada gives an example, actually. I think a couple of purports ago, he gives an example. I think maybe 25th, yeah, I think he gives that example. He says, you know, that when we, for instance, if you eat too much curd cheese, I don't know what you serve at your Sunday feast, but if you eat too much pane butter masala, you may get indigestion because it's too much curd. But if we take another milk product, yogurt, we can take that and it will cure the indigestion. So it's the same milk. One is in the form of curd, one is in the form of yogurt. So the same product of milk actually can be used to give us indigestion, but it can also be used to cure that indigestion. So the material sky is very much like that. We are products of the material sky now because we identify with the material so much. So we need to use that material in a different way to free ourselves. So that is actually work. And there's a lot of discussion about that before we come to this chapter, because everyone has to work. Everyone has to perform activities. So the trick actually is to learn to perform activities in such a way that the activities don't bind us to this world, but they free us from this world. So this is what Krishna is talking about, this transcendental knowledge. So how do we get transcendental knowledge? Because if the transcendental knowledge is so important, then how can we get that knowledge? So this is our fourth chapter starts. Because Arjuna is a Kshatriya, he's a king, and he's on the verge actually of regaining his kingdom after the battle of Kurukshetra. So Krishna actually is telling him that this knowledge, actually, this transcendental knowledge, he is the origin of that knowledge. And he's given it to others, actually. Bhagavad Gita is a universal scripture. It's not just for now, but actually that knowledge, Krishna says he gave it to the sun god 120 million years ago. So that knowledge is eternal. It's not just for now. It's for all kinds of people, actually. All kinds of people who are present in the material world and need to get out. So Krishna, first of all, I said that transcendental knowledge concerns Krishna. It concerns the living entity, the jivas, that's us, and the relationship between them. Because right now, our relationship with Krishna is just budding. We don't have so much relationship with Krishna. So the first thing in transcendental knowledge is knowledge about Krishna. So Arjuna gives Krishna a chance to talk about that by telling him, how is it you gave this knowledge to the sun god, Vivishan? Actually, you're not contemporaries. Sun god is 120 million years ago, and you appeared at the same time as I did. So then Krishna gets a chance to speak about himself, that he is unborn, actually, and his body doesn't deteriorate and appears by his own sweet will. And also he appears when there's a decline in religion and a predominant rise of irreligion. In millenniums, when that occurs, Krishna appears. And then he explains why he appears, to protect the devotees, to annihilate the miscreants and reestablish the principles of religion. So this is the first thing in transcendental knowledge. Krishna gives knowledge about himself. And then previous to this discussion, where Krishna is explaining about himself and about transcendental knowledge, there's a great discussion about work. Because Bhagavad Gita actually can be considered like that, is the art of all work. How to be in this world, but not be of this world. How to use the material sky to return to our original destination, the spiritual world, like that. So Krishna returns to discussion about knowledge, knowledge as it's applied to work, this transcendental knowledge. Because when we understand that Krishna is the giver of everything, actually, he's the source of everything, he's also gives the result of our work. Krishna is explaining that in the verses which follow about his personal nature and why he appears. He says actually that as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, of son of Prita. So Krishna is the giver of the results of our work, actually. This touches on what Krishna said in second chapter. He says, we have a right to perform our duty, but we're not entitled to the fruits of our action. We should never consider ourselves the cause of the results of our activities, and we should never be attached to not doing our duty. So work is very important, actually. The way we work can either bind us or free us. So when we take this transcendental knowledge and we apply it to our work, actually then we can become free. And the secret of that actually is to offer the results of our work to Krishna. And a couple of verses before we get to this verse today, Krishna was saying that if we do that actually, then everything becomes merged into transcendence. The work itself, what is offered, everything actually returns to its original state of Brahman. The material becomes spiritual. So this is the way of becoming free of the material nature. That is what a devotee does. Everything should be offered as sacrifice to the Supreme Lord, actually. Because in our lives, we have to perform sacrifice. No one can escape it. Everyone must perform sacrifice. Even if it's a little bit, we must perform some sacrifice. And we usually do that for the things we want. That is actually the sum and substance of our work. Our work is meant for sacrifice to Vishnu. Because actually work as a sacrifice to Vishnu, the work binds us. So in Gita, Sri Krishna is teaching us that. He's trying to teach us how to use our work as sacrifice. So as I'm explaining, everyone has to sacrifice. No one can escape that. No, we can take a simple example. We go to school. Most of us actually these days have some kind of higher education. When you're in higher education, you have to sacrifice that time and study. Now, why do we do that? Why do we make that sacrifice? It's not pleasant, actually. You have to grit your teeth and you have to work hard to do well in your exams. So why do we make that sacrifice? We make that sacrifice because we know that if we perform that sacrifice of learning nicely, then it will improve our situation later. We'll be able to get a better job and our life situation will be much more stable. We'll have more choices. Actually, money gives more choices. So this is a simple example to show sacrifice means that we give up something or we accept some voluntary difficulty because it will give a better situation later. So it's also true of transcendental sacrifice, sacrifice meant for Vishnu. If we can learn to do that, if we can learn to sacrifice our work for the sake of the Supreme, then actually we can return to the spiritual world because everything becomes spiritual. So this is what Krishna is teaching, transcendental knowledge. So actually in these verses we're studying from 25 to 33, Krishna is explaining different kinds of sacrifice. Because when we sacrifice, benefit comes from that actually. Sacrifices can be grouped into sacrifice of material possessions and sacrifices for transcendental knowledge. And that is what Krishna is explaining in these verses we're studying. Yesterday, I think you studied the first verse of the group, 25, that some perfectly worship the demigods. So sacrifices can be done with different reasons. Generally, the sacrifices we perform are done because we want some benefit from it in this material world. Mostly the sacrifices we perform are like that. And, whatever we want to do, whatever we want to be, wherever we want to go in life, some sacrifice is required for that in order that we'll get a better situation later on. So this is the whole business of sacrifice. So sacrifice can also be used, as I explained, like too much curd cheese can be cured by yogurt. So similarly, if we work in the right way, then our material disease can actually be cured. And that begins with actually giving up the fruits of our action. Krishna is explaining that at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. But actually, if we can first of all analyze the nature of this world. My soul is like this, the soul is like this, and the body is like that. The body is temporary in nature, the soul is eternal. This is analytical study or Sankhya. One can understand what one is and what one's nature is in this way. And although we hear that, we don't really get it. It's a theoretical understanding for us. So then Krishna explains that it can be understood through working without fruitive results, by performing sacrifice actually, because that ultimately means to sacrifice the results of one's work for the Supreme Lord, for Vishnu, to make him pleased with us, so that we can, by his mercy, be released from this material world. So this is the subject matter we are studying, this transcendental knowledge. Because if we understand actually the nature of things, the nature of ourselves, the nature of the Supreme Lord, and our relationship between, then our work can take on a different perspective. We can say that we can work, the same work actually can be done in a different way, and it will actually liberate us. Just like if we take a scalpel can be used to save a person's life in the hands of a great surgeon. And in the hands of a murderer, it can kill someone. The scalpel itself is inert. It's how the scalpel is used, which is important. So similarly, the work we do actually is inert in itself. It's not good or bad, but it's how we use that work, which is important. So transcendental knowledge enables us to use that work as a device to free ourselves, rather than a device by which we become more and more bound to this material nature. The same work, actually, if it's performed in Krishna consciousness. So that was the 24th verse. Actually, from the 16th to the 24th verse, Krishna is explaining that, different kinds of work. So I'm sure you all know that. Can I interact? Is that allowed? I can interact.
Yes, Prabhuji.
You have been studying in the verses 16 to 24, 3 kinds of work. Can anyone tell me? 16 to 24 in this chapter, 3 kinds of work Krishna is explaining.
Is it Prabhuji karma, vikarma, and akarma?
Yes, that's quite correct. Thank you very much. That's quite correct. Yes. Now, Krishna is explaining in this section from 16 to 24 that we must learn to perform akarmic work. I'm sure you know the definitions of these 3 terms, but I'm just going to remind you. You see, karmic work means work which is sanctioned by the Veda, but unfortunately it has material reaction, either good or bad. Now, and if we perform work which is sanctioned by the Veda, then we will gradually rise, because it is religious work. It is work for sense gratification, but it's religious. It won't degrade you. So this is karma. Then there's vikarma, means work which is forbidden by the Veda, because that work will degrade you. That will give you a lower position and ultimately may even take you out of human form of life. And then there is akarma, as the opposite of karma. Karma means you get a reaction, so akarma means you don't get a reaction. That is transcendental work. So Krishna is telling that in this section, actually, that we have to learn to work like that. And the more work that we can perform, which is akarmic, the more we're freed from the material nature. Till eventually, actually, everything, although it's material nature, because we use it properly, we offer it to Krishna, we offer it to Vishnu, therefore it becomes transcendental. Even the work and the offering itself become transcendental. So this is where we come to up to the 24th verse. Now, from 25 to 33, Krishna is explaining different kinds of Vedic sacrifices, because the whole Vedic culture is set up in such a way that whoever we are and wherever we are, and whatever background we come from, whatever occupation we're engaged in, we can be gradually elevated to the spiritual platform. That is the whole point of Varnashram Dharma. So we have to remember that this context, the context of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explaining those things from the point of view of different kinds of personalities, of different kinds of inclination to perform sacrifice. Because if we perform sacrifice, we get transcendental knowledge, and we also get detachment from the material world, which is the problem we face. Now, this Krishna's problem, he wants us to get out of the material world, but we're so attached. So we have to use the work in such a way that the work will free us. So therefore, Krishna is talking about different kinds of sacrifices. Now, sacrifices actually are performed differently according to your nature. Some people like to give in charity. Some people like to drill the breath. It's called pranayam. Some people like to sacrifice their possessions. Some people like to offer different kinds of the fruits of different kinds of austerities and penances. Different kinds of people have different kinds of ways that they like to perform sacrifice. It comes naturally because of their nature. Just in the same way that we work differently according to our nature. So there's different kinds of work. So the discussion here is first of all about the demigods. That was yesterday's verse. There are some people who like to perform sacrifices to the demigods, to properly worship them, actually, because people can see the demigods in different ways. Prabhupada is pointing out in that purport that many people see the demigods as a route to get a better situation in this material world, either short-term or long-term. So they often perform sacrifices to the demigods to get some short-term benefit, to get a better situation, or even maybe a better birth in the next life. But Prabhupada's also pointing out in that purport that we can worship the demigods properly. So properly means to understand they're the limbs. They're the executive agents of the Supreme Lord in this material world. And if they're worshipped with that in mind, as the limbs of the Lord, or parts of the universal form of the Lord, then actually that is a sacrifice which can give transcendental knowledge. It actually helps us to understand the nature of this world. So that is one way. So then we come to today's verse. Madhiji, do you read Sanskrit, or how do you do it?
Yes, Prabhuji, we read the Sanskrit because we are all aspiring devotees, so we are trying.
Okay. So is it call and repeat, or just read it, or how do you do it?
So 3 of us read it, but in the interest of time, today we'll just read once.
Just read once.
Yeah, we can read.
Myself or others?
Probably we'll like if you read it so that we learn how to read the verses.
Okay. So how about if I read a line and everyone repeats?
Yes, Prabhuji, that would be fantastic.
Okay, so I wanted to give introduction so that when we read this verse, we understand the context it's coming in. What is the context? How is this verse connected to the discussion? Because here, in order to get, Krishna in 4th chapter is discussing how do we get transcendental knowledge? Because transcendental knowledge gives us the tools that we can work in the right way in this material world and become free. So transcendental knowledge is a very important thing. So I wanted to give the context. How do these sacrifices relate? These sacrifices discussed from 25 to 33, how do they relate to transcendental knowledge? Because the Vedic culture is giving us different pathways by which we can come out of this material world. So a large part of that is work and sacrifice. Krishna is teaching in Bhagavad Gita how to link your work to sacrifice so that it frees you. So sacrifice is a very important thing. And sacrifice is something which is common to all of us, actually. We may not think of it in terms of transcendental realization as a result of it, but usually we understand sacrifice as a way that we get a better situation. But we can take sacrifice beyond that to these Vedic processes. Actually, Bhagavad Gita is full of all kinds of Vedic formularies and processes for advancing in spiritual life. But of course, the interesting thing is at the end, Krishna says, okay, give it all up and just surrender unto me. But in order to understand that, we need to study these different Vedic processes, that we understand the different progressions, because we also use, as devotees, we use some of these principles, and we'll see when we come to the purport. Okay, so I'm going to read line by line. No? Shrotadin indriyanyanye. It's a bit of a tongue twister, this one, no? But it's good for us. Actually, when the Sanskrit is difficult and there are many syllables, the trick is to slow down and take it syllable by syllable. But let's do that first line again. Shrotradin indriyanyanye. Samyamagni shujuvati. Not an easy verse, this one. Sabdadin vishayananya. Indriyagnu shujuvati. Do you do word for word?
Yes, Prabhuji, we
We
do.
do word for word. Okay, so I say, you say. Is that okay?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Adini, such as the hearing process.
Such as hearing process. Such as the process.
Indriyani, senses.
Senses.
Anye,
Anye.
others.
Anye.
Sanyayam,
Others.
sanyama, of restraint.
Of restraint.
Agnishu,
Agnishu.
in the fires.
In the fire.
Juvati,
Jivati.
offer.
Offer.
Shabda adin,
Shabdadi.
sound, vibration,
Sound vibration. Sound vibration.
etc. Vishayan,
Vishayan.
objects of sense gratification.
Object of sense gratification.
Anye, others.
Others.
Indriya,
Indriya.
of the sense organs.
Of the sense organs.
Agnishu,
Agnishu.
in the fires.
In the fire.
Juvati,
Jivati.
they sacrifice.
They sacrifice.
So this verse is dealing with sacrifice for two groups of people. So we could say that it is sacrifice from the point of view of Varnashram Dham, because Varnashram Dham is Krishna's system for enacting spiritual progress from whatever walk of life or whatever position we're coming from. So this verse is a view of sacrifice from the Varnashram Dham perspective. So I'm going to read the translation. Some, the unadulterated brahmacharis, sacrifice the hearing processes and the senses in the fire of mental control. And others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. So do we repeat, or how do we do it?
Yes, Prabhuji, we repeat. We read
We
the
should.
translation twice.
Read the translation twice.
Prabhu,
So when I take,
Shyamananda Prabhu, can I interrupt?
of course.
Your time is 1 hour behind us. We have people from India who are with us, Rachna and Sonal and family. For them, it's 11:30. So you better
Okay.
give us the this because you gave so much of a synopsis. So now we don't have much time. So you
Okay,
better,
I'll be quick, but we won't read the translation again. I'll be quick.
because then you'll find everyone leaving the program because they're getting.
Okay, Manasi, Mother Manasi, I'll follow your directions. So I'm going to read the purport because we want to discuss some of the important points from the purport. The members of the 4 divisions of human life, namely Brahmachari, the Grihastha, the Vanaprastha, and the Sannyasi, are all meant to become perfect yogis or transcendentalists. Some human life is not meant for, since human life is not meant for enjoying sense gratification like animals, the 4 orders of human life are so arranged that one may become perfect in spiritual life. The brahmacharis, or the students, under the care of the bona fide spiritual master, control the mind by abstaining from sense gratification. A brahmachari hears only the words concerning Krishna consciousness. Hearing is the basic principle for understanding, and therefore the pure brahmachari engages fully in Hare Nama Nu Kirtanam, chanting and hearing the glories of the Lord. He restrains himself on the vibration of material sounds, and his hearing is engaged in the transcendental sound vibration of Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Similarly, the householders who have some license for sense gratification perform such acts with great restraint. Sex life, intoxication, and meat eating are general tendencies of human society. But a regulated householder does not indulge in unrestricted sex life and other sense gratification. Marriage on the principles of religion on the principles of religious life is therefore current in all civilized human society, because that is the way for restricted sex life. This restricted, unattached sex life is also a kind of yajna, because the restricted householder sacrifices his general tendency towards sense gratification for higher transcendental life. So I'm going to read the translation again. Some, the unadulterated brahmacharis, sacrifice the hearing processes and the senses in the fire of mental control, and others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of the senses in the fire of the senses. So this term is used, agnishu. Agnishu means like a fire sacrifice. You're going to offer, make some offering. Like when we make the offering in the fire sacrifice, we pour the ghee, we pour the oblations, and you say swaha. So it's like the offering that's being described here is like that, because it is being an offering into the fire. Into the fire means it's like an offering and a fire sacrifice. Because when we make that offering, then we will get some benefit. And the benefit we'll get, actually all these sacrifices which are mentioned here, from 25 to 33, Krishna says at the end actually that they all reveal transcendental knowledge, that one advances spiritually by doing this. So each of them is like an oblation into the fire, an offering, a sacrifice, in order that one can increase one's transcendental knowledge. One takes steps forward spiritually. So the brahmacharis are the first from the Varnashram point of view. That is student life. We find that there are four ashrams. They are brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. So they can be described as student life, married life, retired life, and renounced life. So everyone in every ashram is supposed to make an endeavor to advance spiritually by particular kinds of sacrifice which are relevant to their particular ashram. So in this case, the first one we're dealing with, the unadulterated brahmacharis, sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control. That is because in the Vedic context that a brahmachari would actually go to the place of his spiritual master. And when he goes to the place of his spiritual master, he would be trained. Actually be trained, even it's said in some places that one wouldn't eat unless the spiritual master calls him to eat. So everything for the brahmachari is done on very, very strictly controlled, regulated conditions. So normally, if we're not living that kind of life, we would hear all kinds of things. But the brahmachari actually hears only the words of his spiritual master and the words of the scripture by reading. So his process of his senses are very carefully controlled. So this is why it says here, the hearing process, especially, because a brahmachari only hears the things which the spiritual master wants him to hear. transcendental sound vibration. So that's a sacrifice. He's giving up. It's called prajalpa, we say like that. That's one of the things that Rupa Goswami says can spoil our spiritual life, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. So a brahmachari, one who's being trained by the spiritual master, he makes that sacrifice. Instead of talking prajalpa and all kinds of things which are not beneficial, he sacrifices the hearing process by only hearing the things that the spiritual master wants him to hear, by only hearing spiritual subject matter. And also not just the hearing process, that's the leading thing Krishna is saying here, because it's the leading thing, especially the hearing is sacrificed, that not a lot of things which shouldn't be heard are ignored, they're not discussed, and rather just the spiritual things that the spiritual master wants to hear. So that is the main thing. But also the other senses are not allowed to run riot, to eat when the spiritual master tells, to not let the eyes wander too much into things which could drag them away, that the senses are very carefully controlled. So that's like an offering into the fire. So that is for a brahmachari. So then we come to the grihastha, that's the second two lines, that the householders sacrifice the objects of the senses, because a grihastha actually is not a grihamedi. He doesn't allow, even though he's in grihastha life, and as Prabhupada is saying in the purport, there is some license. A brahmachari doesn't really have much license for sense gratification. Everything's very carefully controlled by the spiritual master. But in one sense, the grihastha has a little more license for sense gratification because he deals with society more, and he's also got wife and children to take care of. So in some ways, it seems that there's more license. But a good grihastha actually will be very careful not to actually let the senses run riot, even though there is some license for it. So the objects of the senses, then, which normally the senses want to contact the objects of the senses, that is the normal situation. But here the grihastha is very carefully controlled. And therefore, in one sense, that he's offering the objects of the senses into the fire of the controlled senses. He's not actually doing what normal people do, trying to enjoy the objects of the senses, because he's also in an ashram. An ashram means a place where spiritual culture is prominent, where spiritual culture is taught and practiced. So this is the grihasthas, and especially Prabhupada is singling out sex life, because sex life is the pinnacle of material enjoyment. In the material world, there are different kinds of enjoyment are available, and especially sex life is considered to be the pinnacle of all material enjoyment, the topmost enjoyment. So therefore, that is to be very carefully controlled. Sex life is meant for a particular purpose. Krishna says in 7th chapter, Kamasmi Bharatashabha, he says, actually that sex life, which is not contrary to religious principles, actually is the proper use of sex life. And Krishna says, I am that sex life. If it's conducted under religious principles, I am that sex life, actually, that is me. But at the same time, that sex life which is unrestricted is like a ball and chain that actually keeps the living entity in this material world. It is sometimes described like that. It's maituna aghara, it's described like that. That this place is considered to be a prison house of sex desire, a place actually where that sex desire binds one, the principle of man and woman. Actually, that is mentioned elsewhere as well. That in this world, actually, we live in a world where the basic principle of the mode of passion is the attraction between a man and a woman. Because actually, we know from our studies that we are neither man nor woman. We're Krishna's eternal spirit soul. So that the grihastha has to learn to behave in this way, to understand things the way they really are, and not to let the senses run away. And therefore, this expression Krishna is using to offer the objects into the fire of the senses, because they're not indulged in the normal way. So these are the two principles which Krishna is discussing here. Now, we should understand that these are like basic Vedic formularies for personalities who are living in Vedic culture. And we don't really have that today. And these formularies which are given in Bhagavad Gita, actually, we don't even have. We can't really establish Varnashram Dharma in this age because everything's so mixed up. And the governmental system doesn't allow it. So a couple of purports on, actually, although these Vedic formularies are given here, Prabhupada a little bit further on actually is mentioning that although these Vedic formularies are there, they cannot give Krishna consciousness. First one has to come to a stage of liberation. And if one gets the mercy of a devotee, then he can come to the platform of Krishna consciousness. So the Krishna consciousness, which Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas and Krishna are teaching us, actually is far above these Vedic formularies. And we can understand that because at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, just give everything up and surrender to me. Whatever your dharma is, doesn't matter. Give up all your dharmas and surrender to me. So we are very fortunate that we don't have to go through these stages, because in these 6 chapters, we are seeing this ascending ladder. It's called the yoga ladder. It begins with karma kanda, trying to enjoy the material nature, but that enjoyment is presented in a religious way so that we can get the things we desire and we can advance spiritually. Then we come to karma yoga. One gradually begins to realize that there is an authoritative system, and we are part of that system. We owe respect, and we should sacrifice to that system. So then one begins to give, give part of his income, or begins to offer sacrifices because he knows the demigods are in control. And actually, he's not autonomous. And gradually, in this way, it advances. We come to Nishkam Karma Yoga. One becomes free from the material nature. And then one develops a desire to meditate. And gradually, this way, one comes to the platform of understanding the supersoul. And the supersoul is a person I should surrender. So it's a gradual advancement from chapter 2 to chapter 6, step by step. So these are the Vedic formularies, how one would normally be part of the Vedic culture and gradually, little by little, would be advanced to a position of liberation, of understanding clearly with realization that I'm not the body, and then coming into contact with the supersoul and worshipping the supersoul. But we can, Prabhupada is pointing out, I think it's 28th purport, Prabhupada is saying that actually these Vedic formularies are on a much platform than the devotional service. And we can understand that in the following way. Because we're talking here about sacrifices. So in the 25th verse of the 10th chapter, Krishna is mentioning, he says, Gyanam, Japong, Gyanam, Japa, Yagyosmi, Krishna is saying. He said that of all sacrifices, he's saying, I'm the chanting of the holy names, I'm the japa. So that is our sacrifice. We don't have to do these things. We use the principles. Yes, we control our senses, but we don't have to use these Vedic formularies in order to advance in our spiritual lives. It is done automatically by the performance of devotional service, which is a special gift for this age. We don't normally get that. Krishna is saying here, you surrender to me and we'll talk business at the end of the Bhagavad Gita. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying you simply take this love of God, chant the holy name. As Prabhupada said, chant and be happy. So it's been made very easy for us. We don't have to go through these different Vedic sacrificial processes. We can simply take what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is offering, and follow these simple principles. Chant the holy name of the Lord, follow regulative principles, read Srila Prabhupada's books, mix with the devotees, and this way gradually our spiritual life will develop. But we use these principles. We also have to learn to control the senses. We can't say, well, we're devotees, so we don't have to. So we use these principles. So both these things are present in this discussion. When we read Prabhupada purport, we'll see that. But Prabhupada is pointing out that we're actually on the platform of executing pure devotional service. We should try to be on that platform by following as closely as we can. In that way, then, we don't have to worry about these Vedic formularies, about going to the house of the spiritual master, and only hearing what the spiritual master. No, we can stay at home, actually. This process is so wonderful, so powerful, that we don't have to worry so much about these different Vedic formularies which are given in the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada is pointing that out. He's saying that Krishna consciousness, actually, the practice of Krishna consciousness is far above these Vedic formularies of sacrifice, because it directly engages us in the service of the Lord. These Vedic formularies will eventually bring one to the platform of liberation, and from there, then one can go on to understand what is devotional service. But we go straight. It's like Prabhupada said, it's like you can take the lift, or you can go up the stairs of a building. So we can get in, we can push the button, we'll immediately go. We don't have to go through these different stages. We can immediately come to the devotional service of the Lord. So both these things are present in the discussion. Prabhupada is explaining, but at the same time we use the principles that are given in this discussion. The principles are that we also have to learn to control the senses. That is what these different processes are also explaining. That unless one can control the senses, actually, one has no hope actually, of getting out of the material world. But the thing is, if we don't have to artificially do it. By engaging in devotional service, our senses are automatically controlled. Because Krishna, after all, is Rishikesha. He's the master of the senses. So if we engage our senses in the service of the Lord, they're automatically controlled. We don't have to make a separate endeavor. We simply, our sacrifice is to perform devotional service as much as we can. And of course, that begins with the tongue and the ears. We have to chant and we have to hear. These two things, especially Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam is especially emphasizing that we should hear the pastimes of the Lord and we should chant his glories, because these two things are directly associating with Krishna. So although we need to understand these Vedic formularies, we don't have to worry so much about them, in detail. How do I make these things happen in my life? But rather, we should take the principles which Srila Prabhupada has given, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given, engage in devotional service, because this way our senses are automatically controlled. So there are some other verses which come after this, which are explaining other different ways. Similarly, these different sacrifices which are mentioned are all leading to this platform of increased transcendental knowledge, so that we can come to the platform we're knowing we're not the body, that we're eternal servant of Krishna, and therefore, we can come to that point of devotional service. But we have already got that. Srila Prabhupada is giving directly. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is giving directly. We can simply engage in that devotional service and go straight. We don't have to go up the stairs, even though we're using the principles. So I don't want to go on too long because it's late, as everyone was saying, and I want to give a chance as well if devotees want to make comments or ask questions or share realizations. Because I know you've been studying Bhagavad Gita quite some time. And it's also nice to hear from each other, and share realizations that we have about the discussion we're having. So if there are comments or questions or realizations, we can discuss a bit.
Hare Krishna, everybody. There are no questions on the chat, so kindly unmute yourself and ask a question.
If you don't, that's okay. But if you don't have a question, share a realization, maybe.
Yeah, Divyesh Prabhuji, Vivek Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Divyesh Prabhuji, do you have a question or a comment or a realization that you would like to share?
I'd just like to say thank you very much. It's been such a good lecture. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
If while people are still thinking, can I acknowledge Ekanath from Kampala, Sonal and Rachna from India, Punrik Prabhu, Ravi and Arthapriya from Nairobi, so many others actually, Pranali and Rachel. And however, we are grateful that they have all come and attending this Zoom program. Over whoever wants comments or realization questions.
Yes, we especially, yes.
Next time you have to come straight on so that there's more time for questions, because at this time everyone is thinking, how can we end the session and go back to...
But I did come on at the appointed time.
Yes, Prabhuji, you were there even before time. So
yeah.
No. That we cannot challenge any person from UK about timing. It's
I came on time, I did, honestly. As Mataji is saying, I was a little bit early, actually, because that's English. We're trained like that, It's 7 o'clock, you must be there at 5 to.
Yes,
5 to 7,
that's the way, the sessions are open even 15 minutes before.
And so by the way, Kritika for right now is in the UK, Shyamananda Prabhu. She's hosting this from the UK, although originally from Eldoret.
Glorious to you, Mataji. Thank you very much. It's even earlier in the UK. It's actually 7 o'clock there, isn't it?
Yes.
It's 8 o'clock here, and it's 9. And in India, it must be like 11:30.
Yes.
Yeah. So we commend those devotees for coming. Thank you very much. I'd just like to acknowledge everybody. So if there are questions, we can dissolve the session then, if that's okay.
Okay. So you tell us, we'll get you again soon.
Only if you promise to come back.
Okay, of course. Now, if you invite me, I'll come. No, I just hope the devotees are happy with the presentation and they feel they gained something from it.
I think it was excellent, and I'm sure others would find that as well. Prabhuji,
So if you invite me, I'll come.
if there's a dedicated day that you would like to come, we can do that as well, if there's a day that suits you.
Can I think about it and get back to Manasi or yourself?
Yes.
I'll think about it, because I have four. If I do this one regularly, it'll be 4 Zoom groups a week. So I have to think carefully about where I'm going to put that.
Yes, Prabhuji.
I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Is there any questions? Because we still have 10 minutes. Kruti, Vivek Prabhuji, Ravi Prabhuji. I think today's text was a revision of what we have been doing. Prabhuji, if you can throw some more light on Nishkarma. Like, we know about the Karma Kanda, we know about the Karma Yoga.
Yeah, because part of the discussion was the yoga ladder, because the first 6 chapters actually deal mostly with karma, how one can use one's work to elevate oneself. We touched on that in the discussion as well. So I think everyone understands the term of karma kanda. Everyone understands that term, no? You see, the Veda is filled with different sacrifices because we have come here wanting to enjoy. So Krishna has provided the karma kanda part of the Veda, which actually incidentally is mostly the Veda. The most part of the Veda, 96%, is karma kanda. How we can get what we want, enjoy in a religious way without degrading ourselves, So that way, at least you're following the Veda and you won't degrade your birth or degrade yourself by going after the things you want. So that is the large part of the Veda. That is called karma. But then as we do that, because we have to approach the priests, we have to deal with the Veda, we have to give some dakshin in order to perform those sacrifices. There are mantras for Vishnu. Gradually, we get purified over many lifetimes. And then what we were performing for our own sense gratification increasingly becomes karma yoga. That we understand that there is an authority system, that they're demigods. Initially, the demigods are there. We're performing sacrifices to get benedictions from the demigods. But then gradually, as purification comes, we understand there is a supreme who's in charge of the demigods. So gradually, then, we come to the platform of, first of all, giving a portion of the result of the sacrifice to the authority system, to the Brahmins who are performing the sacrifices like that. We give part of it back because we know some dakshin is required. And then we gradually understand more, and we understand that actually the Supreme Lord is in charge of everything, and actually, therefore, out of gratitude, I should offer what I am getting in sacrifice to the Supreme Lord. So we see that in 3rd chapter. Krishna is saying that work done as a sacrifice to Vishnu must be performed. Otherwise, work binds one to this material world. And there's a cycle of sacrifice. And Krishna is saying, if you don't engage in that, if you don't offer to the demigods, you're simply a thief. So this is karma kanda. So then gradually it evolves. As we perform this over many lifetimes, purity begins to come little by little. So then gradually what happens is that we want to engage with that system of authority, Krishna and the demigods, but at the same time we still have a desire to enjoy. So that is called sakam karma yoga. Karma means the lust to enjoy the material world, and sa means with. So we're performing karma, but with the desire to enjoy it, but we've got some understanding that there is an authority structure. So then, as that is performed more and more, then actually eventually one becomes freed from the influence of the material nature. That is called nishkam karma yoga. Because at that stage, one has become purified and one doesn't need to perform duties, because duties are intended for purification. But also there's no reason not to do them if one has come to the transcendental platform, at least the liberated platform. So that is called nishkam karma yoga. No desire, nishkam, no lust. I'm performing the karma, but there's no lust to enjoy the material world. So this is the way that things are gradually advancing. But even in karma yoga, one is still attached to the work. One wants to work in a particular way. So then gradually, when becomes purified by performance of karma yoga, and gradually one comes to the platform where one is freed substantially from the influence of the material nature. And a natural desire to meditate develops and turn inwards. That is the difference between the material and the spiritual. Spiritual means we look inwards for our enjoyment, and material means we look outwards. We try and find it outside ourselves. So gradually the desire for meditation develops, and then one turns inward and one comes in contact with the supersoul. One meditates on the supersoul. That's 6th chapter. But eventually one realizes that supersoul is a person. And then one comes to the platform of surrendering to that supersoul. And that becomes Bhakti Yoga. That's where the 6th chapter ends. So this is a progression. So we're partway through that in 4th chapter. Transcendental knowledge is required in order that we can work with the proper understanding. So this is how the 4th chapter fits into the overall picture. Yeah, so nishkam means one's not attached to the fruit, but one is attached to the way of working. That is the difference between karma yoga and bhakti. That in karma yoga, one is working, but one is attached to the work, the way of working. But in bhakti, you see, the spiritual master says, show Shyamananda, go and do this. And we go and do it because we want to follow the order of our spiritual master. So in bhakti, we follow the order of the spiritual master. But in karma yoga, we do what we want to do, but we do it for Krishna. So this is the gradual progression from chapter 3 to chapter 6. And we're partway through that in chapter 4. So transcendental knowledge is required to underpin the activity. So we know what to do and what not to do. Hence akarma, vikarma, and karma. And we should try to perform akarma. We should try to perform work, which is a sacrifice to Vishnu. And in this way, actually, we'll be freed. Is that all right, Mataji?
Yes, Prabhuji. But even in the nishkarma, we still have a desire to serve. We still have the desire to chant, or we still have the desire to speak.
Yes, that is called Mishra Bhakti. That when one is performing devotional service, but there is other desires are present as well, then the devotional service is mixed. That we may be performing some devotional service, but we still have some desire to enjoy the material world, or we still have some attachment to having knowledge or wanting liberation. So that is called Mishra Bhakti. So that's a little different from karma yoga. Karma yoga is simply giving up the fruits of one's activity, no? And then gradually it becomes that one offers the fruit of the work to Krishna. Actually, one offers the work and the fruit to Krishna. So that's the difference between karma yoga and bhakti yoga. Is it right?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you very much for the clarification. Any more? We still have 5 minutes. I think it's Sunday.
Actually, I deliberately stopped early because the way, at least I don't know how you conduct your Zoom here, but mostly I conduct my Zooms in an interactive way. I want devotees to also share with me, because when we interact and we speak our realizations, they have a way of becoming very powerful. And even actually we can learn so much from each other. Just because I happen to be the one who's the facilitator, it doesn't mean that you can't contribute to the discussion. Because after all, our process is hearing and chanting. Hearing and chanting, these are the two main things. So it isn't that we should just sit back and listen all the time, but rather when one devotee speaks, we may find that something that devotee says resonates with us and we want to share. Yes, when I was reading Bhagavad Gita, I understood that point. This is what I felt. So I find that in the groups, that's very important facet of the group, to actually give back and to share and to relate what I've understood, because it makes the realization very strong. And it makes our bhakti grow very quickly. So that's why I left some time at the end. So please don't feel shy to share. If you have some realization based on what you've heard, please share.
Prabhuji, that's the way we do it. We leave the last 20, we read and then we discuss among ourselves what we thought it was.
Everyone's scared of me because no one is discussing.
I don't think so, Prabhuji, but we want to listen more. This.
Oh, okay, you want to listen more.
This hearing, we've now got a taste of it. So that's what.
Okay, that's wonderful. That's so
wonderful.
wonderful.
Get you every day. So when we get you, we just want to get everything.
Yeah, you just want to soak up the nectar. Yeah.
Yes.
So
there is one question from Divesh Prabhuji.
Okay, Divesh.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hi, Krishna.
I just have a question that sometimes when you're engaged in devotional service and you're in the path of Krishna consciousness, at times Maya becomes so strong and tries to pull you off. Is that common, or is that just sometimes it happens? And what is the best way to counter that? Hare Krishna.
Okay. It's quite common, you and me both. I think a lot of devotees have this understanding that Maya is a bit like a karate instructor. She'll go after your will, you know. If you're 95% Krishna conscious, she's not interested in that. She's interested in your 5%, the weak points. So temptation will be there, you know, that we will be tempted. We are not so much fixed up in our bhakti generally. We're performing generally what's called anishtita bhakti. It's not nishta, it's not fixed. So therefore we tend to get tempted, and that's okay, you know, because as we grow, that's going to happen. But the thing to do is to know how to deal with it, you know. When we get tempted, we need some understanding within ourselves, first of all, that I'm being tempted. We have to understand. So we have to know, first of all, when we're being tempted. And then when we're tempted, we have to know what to do. So one thing is to seek the shelter of the other devotees, you know, to share it with somebody that, oh, I was tempted in this way, you know, how should I have dealt with that? Another thing is to understand what Srila Prabhupada is telling us from his teachings, you know, how to deal, what to do in order to get out of that situation. You can physically remove yourself. If it's in your mind, you should turn your mind to a different thought. Because when we enact some activity, it goes thinking, feeling, willing. It begins with thinking, then we meditate on it and we feel it, and then we want to go do it. So Srila Prabhupada says that a devotee is very expert at turning things away in the thinking stage. So to turn, you know, if we're tempted in our mind to turn away from that, to think something else, don't indulge the thought, to go and explain what happened to another devotee who could perhaps help us and tell us, you know, what to do. We have to learn to recognize when Maya is coming and know how to deal with it. You can chant the Shringa Pranam, you can pick up your beads, you could get yourself out of that situation, you could turn your mind away from it, you know, by remembering the instructions of Srila Prabhupada and other devotees in our movement. So these are some of the things we can do. And, you know, if we become practiced at turning away, we get stronger, actually. And then gradually what happens is when the temptation comes, we turn away very quickly. We don't meditate on the thing which Maya is offering us. So strength comes from practice. But if we give in, you know, there's a stage of Anishtita Bhakti called like that. It's a war with Maya. It's called Vishai Sangara. It's one of the stages of Anishtita Bhakti. What can happen then is that there's a bit of a war. Should I indulge or should I not indulge? And then you need the knowledge of the scripture. At that point, you need some transcendental knowledge to connect it with today so that we can say, you know, I know this is not good. So let me turn away from it, you know. Let me take shelter of Krishna. Let me chant Krishna's name. Let me chant the Nishringa Pranam. Let me go talk to another devotee. Let me do something else. Let me get out of this situation. So we have to come practiced at turning away from it with whatever skills and whatever things we've learned. How does that sound? Is that right?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your answer. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
You're welcome. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. There is one more question from Kruti. I'm sorry, the devotees, please forgive me for extending the time, but this is very interesting. So
Okay.
the session is still open, if Prabhuji doesn't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. What's the question? I saw it pop up, but I didn't have a chance to read it.
Very fast last minute. Yeah, I want to ask here, they're talking about the bona fide spiritual master. So who is actually the bona fide spiritual master? Is it the mentors who are teaching us the Bhagavad Gita? Is it the Bhagavad Gita or is it Krishna? So if you can explain.
Sure, there are different spiritual masters. No? There are actually 4 kinds of spiritual masters. The first one is the Chaita Guru, that is Krishna in the heart. Then there's Vatma Pradakasha Guru, that's the first person who introduces Krishna to you in the current life. Then there are the 2 main ones that we deal with. They are Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru. Now initially, actually the scripture is saying we have one Diksha Guru, but we can have unlimited Shiksha Gurus. And the scripture is also telling us that the Shiksha Guru and the Diksha Guru, they are equally important. They are both required. So anyone who gives us spiritual instruction, anyone we feel inspired by or we learn something from when they're speaking is a Shiksha Guru. Now we can have hundreds or even thousands of Shiksha Gurus, actually, anyone who inspires our Krishna consciousness. But when we're developing as a devotee, we may find that we're very attracted to one particular devotee. That devotee inspires us. What the things that devotee says go deep into our heart, and we may feel we want to reach out to that devotee and write to that devotee and ask him more questions. So through this process, it's called pariprashnena. We're coming to that verse a little later in this chapter. Krishna says, Tadvini pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. These are the two ways we approach this. One should try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. One should inquire from him and render service to him. Those who have seen the truth can actually help us. They can instruct us because they've actually seen the truth. So the pariprashnena is very important. That is how we will recognize the spiritual master. There are many Shiksha Gurus, those who say things to us and it inspires our Krishna consciousness. We learn something. We become more fixed up as a result of their instructions. But gradually, among all those devotees, you may find that one very much inspires you. That devotee, you feel attracted to that devotee. Then we should engage in pariprashnena. We question that devotee. We present the things which are in our hearts about the struggles we're having in spiritual life, the things we don't understand. And from the answers that you get from that devotee, you will gradually know if that devotee is your spiritual master or not. You will gradually know. But even when we may take initiation from such a person, but even still, we can still have Shiksha Gurus among all the other devotees. Because you'll find you listen to other people's classes, in your Zoom class, this devotee comes on and says some things and it inspires you. So they're all spiritual masters in the Shiksha category. Shiksha means instruction. So they say something which instructs you and your spiritual life grows, your spiritual consciousness grows. That is Shiksha Guru. But we need a Diksha Guru to connect us to the Guru Parampara, the person who links us to Srila Prabhupada. That is the Diksha Guru. And we find that person when we feel very inspired and we engage in the process of questioning and receiving answers. And gradually, if that devotee is your spiritual master, it'll become clear to you through the process of questioning. How does that sound?
Thank you so much. Yes.
Was it helpful?
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, one more question. Divyesh Prabhuji, please ask your question.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
I wanted to ask you, there are many organizations teaching about Krishna consciousness in this world, not only ISKCON. And there are also many other religions as well, apart from Hinduism. And do you get salvation from any of these organizations? Or is it only through the Hare Krishna mantra? Or could any other mantras work? Or could any other prayers work in achieving salvation? Hare Krishna.
Oh, such a nice question. Thank you so much. Such a nice question. You see, first I'll give you a little view of how the Vedic understanding sees the different religions of the world. Because one thing we can understand is that the basic truth is the same in all religions. Basically, the truth is learn to love God. That's basically the message that we're getting from all the religions of the world. Prabhupada says that. He says, actually, religion is anything which teaches you to love God. So therefore, we have to accept all the world's different bona fide religions. But at the same time, it's true that different religious systems give different amounts of information. And I'll briefly explain that to you in the following way. Like, for instance, if you are born into the Islamic culture, your book is the Quran, it's about 6,500 verses. If you're born into Christian cultures, the book is the Bible, it's about 60,000 verses. But if you're born in the Vedic culture, the book actually is 10 billion verses. So you can understand it's on a different level. It gives more information. So it's a bit like the different grades in a school. In a school, there are different grades. It may go grade 1 to 7, and then 8 to 12. So not everyone is ready for grade 12 material. Not everyone is educated to that point. When you first come into school, you have to start with grade R or grade 1. And when you graduated grade 1, then you can go to grade 2 like this. So this is how the Vedas sees the world's different religions. But they're all teaching basically the same thing, but some religious systems have more information than others. And if we want to fall in love with God, actually, which is the basic principle of all the world's religions, then we need to have information about him. So we find in many of the mainstream religions, actually, there's not so much information, very little in some cases, actually. So you could say they're rudimentary understanding, different grades in the school. But when we come to the Vedic understanding, the knowledge of God is very extensive. But even then, it has different levels. There are different, and also there may be other Vedic systems which are being taught, but they don't teach the Yuga Dharma. Because Krishna appears in every age himself, he comes to teach the religious process which is suitable for the age. So in this age, we find that the suitable process is the chanting of the names of God. And interestingly, you find that all the world's religions have that. Everyone has their rosary. You know, the Catholics call it the rosary, the Muslims call it the takbir, we call it the japamala. So you can understand it's a universal principle because everyone does it, but not everyone has the Maha Mantra. Krishna personally appeared to give that Maha Mantra. So you can make spiritual advancement through these other systems, but you can't get Krishna's devotional service except through the Vedic system. Krishna's devotional service. You may be able to advance spiritually, but you cannot go back to the spiritual world except through the process of Krishna consciousness, through the process of devotional service. So anyone who's teaching that process, that pure process of devotional service, you can go back to the spiritual world through that. But you can't be learning in grade 2 and expect to graduate the grade 12 classroom. So the Vedic knowledge is grade 12, whereas the other religious systems of the world are on different levels, different grades in the same school. So I expect you to interact with me a little bit more having heard that.
This is an excellent answer. I think you've explained it the best way I've heard it so far. I really appreciate that, and has made lots of clarifications. Lastly, how do you deal with devotees or people in your life who on the one end are preaching something according to the Bhagavad Gita, but their actions are doing the total opposite, whether it's in the temple, or whether it's in social circle, or whether it's your friends and family. On one hand, you're saying you should be doing A, B, C, D. On the other hand, you're doing the opposites. I mean, a bit of a hypocritical situation sometimes. So, and sometimes you find it very senior people or souls who are in your life. So how do you deal with this? Thank you. Hare Krishna.
That's again such a nice question and so poignant, I think, to what we see in the world. You see, the first thing to understand is that anyone who's trying to practice the religious process is a glorious soul. Actually, no matter where we find them, someone who's practicing Christianity, someone who's practicing Islam, someone who's practicing Judaism, anyone who's practicing or trying to practice a bona fide religious system is a glorious soul, because at least they're trying to purify themselves. But the thing is that even though we may be trying to practice, we may not be pure ourselves. We may not have reached that level. This is why Srila Prabhupada, she was so concerned that we behave properly when we meet people, that we don't, say one thing and do another. But unfortunately, because people are often coming from backgrounds which are not so glorious, they've accepted and they understand what they need to do, but they haven't completely purified themselves. So that's unfortunate, that as you mentioned the word hypocrisy, this is the age of hypocrisy, actually, of people who say one thing and do another. So one thing about this is that people in your life, you were saying people in your life that are not practicing religious process, this or that. You see, one thing is wherever people are at, we should try to encourage them. It's like I have Christian friends, I have Muslim friends. I don't tell them you should need to become a Hare Krishna. I don't tell them that because they're not ready for that. They're fixed in their own religious practice. So I try to encourage them to practice their religious system properly, according to their teacher. And we can give the following example in this respect. If you have a younger brother who's in school and is in grade 1 math, and you're in the school and you're in grade 12 math, do you tell your younger brother, listen, you're an idiot because you're in grade 1? No, you don't do that, actually. Rather, you encourage that grade 1 student to follow the teacher and follow the teachings and do the homework, because if they do, they'll go to grade 2. So this should be our attitude with other religious systems, that we should actually encourage them to practice according to the teaching of their particular system. because that way they will advance. And one day they will come to the level of pure devotional service. So that's one thing that you mentioned. Another thing that you mentioned is that how do we deal with practitioners in our own system who are saying one thing, or preaching one thing, but do another? So, we have to be kind to them as well, because they're trying to practice the religious process. But at the same time, we should, if we have relationship with them, we can go as a younger brother, a loving brother or a loving sister, and tell them, that Prabhu or Mataji, that we're trying to practice spiritual life and you're doing these things and it's not so good because you're saying one thing and doing another. But it must be done as a loving brother or a loving sister. Because if we chastise, actually, it'll have a bad effect. So this is one way of dealing with it. Another way of dealing with it, according to Vaishnava culture, if we don't have a relationship with that person so much, we should find someone in the community who is senior to them that they have a relationship with and explain what we saw. Because sometimes your junior or your equal cannot correct, but a senior can correct. So that is the etiquette of the way of dealing with it. If we see somebody's behaving in a way which is against the teaching, we should try to go to someone who that person has respect for and is senior to them, so that they can be told in a way which will correct. So these are some of the things you dealt with. I wonder if I've covered all the points by giving you that answer.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, you've covered all the points. Thank you. Can I ask, if you don't mind, can I ask one more question?
You can. Well, assuming our host is allowing.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Nodding. She's nodding. Okay.
Prabhuji, my last question is, when somebody harms you, it's very easy to pick up, or you want to revenge, or sometimes the mind wants you to act in a certain way. But to end these karmic reactions, is it just better that you just leave it and don't react? Or should you react so they don't repeat that next time? What is the solution? Hare Krishna.
We have to be very thoughtful in a situation where we are being, abused in some way by another person. You see, the first thing is the devotee understands that this is happening to me as a result of things I've done in the past. That's the first thing a devotee understands. But it's also true that we shouldn't be foolish in the way we deal. For instance, if we're watching somebody who is abusing another person and we can see it's wrong, we shouldn't just tolerate. We should try to do something about that. And similarly, if somebody is we may understand it's our karma, somebody's doing to us. But at the same time, if we can see a way of dealing with that person so they don't do it to others, we should say something. We shouldn't be just like a doormat. A devotee is not like a doormat, actually. Oh, it's my karma, just, I'm just going to accept it. That's part of it. But it's also true that we have to be intelligent. If somebody's doing something which is abusive, which is harmful to others, and they're doing it to us, we could try to tell that person, that, what you're doing is not so good, actually. We shouldn't just take it lying down and just do nothing. When we get to a very advanced stage, we may be able to do that. But as we move through our lives day to day, we can, if somebody's doing something which is not proper, which could, if it's done to somebody else, would be harmful, we can try to tell that person, or try to find somebody who's got a better relationship with that person and tell them. So it's a mixture of things. The devotee understands I'm getting this reaction for something I've done, but also can I help this person to be a better person and, not deal in such an abusive way. So I think both things are there simultaneously. How's that?
Hare Krishna. What does that mean? For example, in the worst case scenario, does that mean you should restrain from just only talking? You should just talk, or do you restrain from physical action? Sometimes if somebody's harming somebody, do you go and stop it physically if you can? Or
this is what I mean when I say we have to be intelligent. We can't, we can't give up common sense. It's like Prabhupada used to say, the problem with common sense is it's not so common. That's the problem with common sense. So we should see, if somebody is doing something harmful, actually, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying in one of his songs in Sharanagati, he's saying that a devotee is paradukha-dukhi. That if something is being done to another person, if a person is suffering, then the devotee feels that suffering. So we shouldn't be foolish. If somebody is being abused, we shouldn't take it lying down. We should do something about it. Words is enough sometimes, but if somebody's being physically beaten up or something, we may need to wade in there and break it up. We have to have common sense. But at the same time, we should also understand that there are karmic reactions going on. So both things have to be there simultaneously. We must have a common sense. We mustn't allow people to be abusive and say nothing. But at the same time, we should have that understanding that people are getting their karmic reactions. So both things are present. We shouldn't be foolish. Is that all right?
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Okay. The questions did come at the end, though. That was good.
Yes, they warmed up to you. They warmed up. They warmed
I
up.
said they were a bit scared of me at first. No?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna. I've just joined, so I'm sorry I missed it. I wish I hadn't missed it. But you were just talking. Can I ask a question? It may not be anything related to.
It doesn't matter. You can ask me any question you like.
Okay, so here's a scenario. There's a devotee. There is a devotee. I mean, not in real life. I mean,
A hypothetical situation.
yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a very good devotee. He chants, he thinks of Krishna all the time. And then on the other hand, there's this, but he's got a temper and I don't know, he can say whatever he likes in that when he becomes that tempered. But then on the other hand, there's another person. He's not a devotee at all. He does not think of Krishna. He does not chant, even though he believes in Krishna. But he's very kind and he is very supportive to other human beings. So
Yeah, that's the conundrum now. How do you resolve something? I understand what you're saying now.
are they the same people in or is one more superior than the other because one's a devotee and the other isn't, but the other one's kinder? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to resolve. You see, the thing is, the kind person, you must make them into a devotee. That's the first thing.
Very hard to make somebody into a devotee.
I'm kind of joking with you a little bit.
Yeah, I know, but okay.
It's unfortunate if someone is a devotee and can't control themselves, behaves badly. It's very unfortunate. We should try to help that devotee be a better devotee. But at the same time, we can't say that somebody is a very good person or they're not a devotee, so we can neglect them. We can't do that either. This is what I'm saying. We have to have some common sense. Someone who's a very good person is laudable. It's a great thing, actually. It's piety. It's actually a symptom of one who is ready to become a devotee. How we go about that is a whole discussion in itself. But, we also can't neglect someone who's trying to be a devotee and practice the process but behaves badly. So things are there. We should revere and try and copy the qualities of a good person who outwardly is not a devotee. And we should be respectful towards a devotee who behaves badly and try and help correct that devotee. Both things should be there. No, we can't, because somebody's trying to practice the process. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was once asked by the residents of Kalinagram, who is a devotee? And do you know what the answer he gave? He said, anyone who chants the holy name of the Lord once is the best among human beings. That was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's answer. So we have to see both sides of it. We should try to help correct a devotee who behaves badly, who loses his temper or this, that, or the other. If he continues to practice the process, that will happen. But we'd also try and help correct that devotee. And somebody's a very wonderful person, we should revere them and we should try and find ways to make that person a devotee. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. I mean, okay. I'll be honest with you now. In my real life, my husband, he is a very nice person, but I give him Mahaprasad every day.
It's a good thing to do.
It's very difficult for him to even. So I don't know what I can do.
Yeah. You see, when it's husband wife, it's very hard for you to preach to him, actually. Very difficult for you because the relationship is very familiar.
And he's more intelligent than I am. And if he asks me a question, unfortunately, I am one of these people who will forget very quickly. I may read the Srimad Bhagavatam in one go or even one slok. and I will forget it tomorrow. So if somebody argues,
okay.
with me, I can't remember anything. I can't.
It's
I
okay.
can't.
The gopis didn't know a lot of shlokas, and they're the best devotees. So don't worry about that. You see, the thing is that just be a good wife, be kind, give him Mahaprasad when you can. If you can, introduce him to a devotee who's very experienced, is a very nice person, who, will just rub shoulders with him a little bit. Give him time, because if you're feeling your Mahaprasad, I promise you it'll happen. It may take time, but it'll happen. And just do the best you can. Don't challenge him. Don't preach to him too much. When he asks questions, if you can't answer, find a devotee you can answer and tell him, look, I'm not so expert, but I talked to this devotee and what he said. Give him Srila Prabhupada's books to read, or just leave them lying around the house even. Find a Back to Godhead or something, leave it lying around the house. Don't be in his face, but just be a good wife, give him contact, with Mahaprasad, with Kirtan, with Prabhupada's books, and just see what happens, and pray to Krishna, because Krishna is the ultimate, my dear Krishna, please make my husband a devotee. It will happen eventually. It may take time.
Yeah, thank you.
Is the things I'm saying are helpful to you?
Is that Smita? Is that Smita?
Say something.
Hare
Is
Krishna
that
Mataji, this is Smita, my friend from
I know.
London.
What's her name?
Smita, she's somebody I know for years from the UK.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Are you in the UK? Smita, are you in the UK?
Yeah,
Yes.
I was just thinking when she's asking the question, I said, is that Smita? Hare Krishna. What? It's so strange how you are on the Zoom. What, Kritika, you invited her?
Yes, I invited her. We do the Tuesday Krishna reading book together.
My good God, Smita, I know her for years,
I
We
bug
met
her
in-
with these Zoom notifications, and she just said, "Oh, I've just seen it." I said, "Then also just join now, just join." So
Smita, I want to say one more thing
I'm
to you.
sorry into joining.
I want to say one more thing to you. You yourself be a very good devotee, and
Sorry?
just you yourself become a very good devotee, and just give your husband contact. Don't push. Don't push him, but rather just
It's
be a devotee.
good.
Serve him Mahaprasadam whenever you can. Leave Srila Prabhupada's books lying around. If you can, find devotees who are very mature and very experienced, and somehow or other make friends with them, bring them into the house, have in contact with him. All these things in a very gentle way. And I promise you it will happen. It may take time, but it will if you do those things. Is that helpful?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. But I am struggling with chanting. I used to chant a lot. And when we had this, at one stage, I even went to 8 rounds a day. And now I
Wow.
sometimes do 1.
You need more
Sometimes I
association.
don't get any, but that depresses me a lot.
Smita,
I know I should
Smita,
be
you need more
chanting.
association. That's how your spirits and your practice will be lifted. You need to mix with other devotees as much as you can. And automatically, your enthusiasm to chant, your ability to chant will grow. You need association. Anyway, it's good. You must come on this group every time it meets. That's a start. Will you do that for us?
Thank you so
Every day, every day, every day. If I can do it, you can do it.
I don't normally open up to anybody. Kritika Mataji might know. Even
But
Mansingh.
anyway, you've opened up to us tonight, so if you've done it once, you can do it again. I'm so happy you came on the group tonight. Just join us. Whenever this group meets and you can, just join the group. That's a start. And then also the physical association of other devotees, if you can do it, I don't know, whereabouts in London are you?
I'm about half an hour from the Wat Manor Temple.
Okay, so you can go then.
I can, with this COVID, it's slightly difficult now.
But try at least once in a while, try and go to the temple.
There are 3 more questions, Prabhuji.
Okay. Well, I'll answer as long as you don't mind.
Okay, Prahlad, please ask your question, and then Divyesh Prabhuji, and then Ravi Nathani.
Just 1 minute, I want to check with Smita. Smita, is that all right, the things we've said?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Smita, I want you to come on this group whenever you can. Is that a deal?
Yes, definitely. I'd love to. Thank you.
Okay, the other questions?
Prahlad?
Okay. Prabhuji, my question is sort of similar to Mataji's, but it's more of my case
Okay,
personally.
shoot,
I love
shoot.
books. I love books so long as it's a good story, fictitious or based on a true story. So
Okay.
that's why I love reading the Bhagavad Gita and doing analysis every time. But when it comes to rounds, and my mom says, "Oh, do your rounds, do your rounds," I just feel like, uh, do I
Yeah,
have to?
okay. Do I have to? So I tell you
Yes.
what, when people tell me this, I tell you what I tell them. You see, don't force it. It has its own life. You know, what's the use of forcing it? Even Krishna says, you know, a man of knowledge doesn't get into repression, because what can repression accomplish? Don't force it, but rather, you know, go listen to kirtan. Do you like to listen to kirtan?
Yeah, I also like playing the mridanga.
Okay, so why don't you do that? You know, because that's also listening to the holy name. It's non-different. And, you know, if the japa doesn't work for you now, just do the things that you like. Listen to kirtan, play the mridanga. And I promise you, that gradually that feeling to chant on japa will grow. Don't force it. You know, that's what I'd tell you. When your mother tells you, go listen, go chant on your japa, put on a kirtan and play the mridanga.
Yes.
It's the same thing, you know, you're still listening to the holy name. Does that help?
Yeah, that does help. That does help.
Your mother's going to get on my case now, though, I think.
Sadhana
No, not
Mataji. Hare Krishna. Divyesh Prabhuji, please ask your question.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Just going back to what I'd asked earlier regarding
Sure.
violence, non-violence, and devotees or abusive relationships, or is it when is revenge part of the solution? And should you, because sometimes if somebody does something and you try and stop it, whatever, unless you act sometimes, and would that not be considered now a karmic reaction or revenge? Or should you just say, you know what, I give up and let Krishna deal with it? Hare
No, but
Krishna.
that might be a little foolish to say, well, you know, it's Krishna's problem, let him deal with it. The thing is, you're in the situation. You know, one very nice devotee in our movement, Mahaprabhu, he told me once, and I try and live my life by this principle now. He said, if Krishna's showing you something, it's because he wants you to do something about it. That, I think, is a good why, you know. If you see something which is you know is wrong, Krishna's telling you, I want you to do something about this, you know. So I think we have to be a human being first and a devotee second. Does that make sense to you?
Sure, Prabhuji.
In other words, we have to, first and foremost, let's try and be a human being. If we see something which is wrong, let's do something about it, you know. And then we can worry about being a devotee afterwards. I think it's for me, that's how it is, you know. Why should we tolerate things which are abusive, which are harmful to others, if we can do something about it? Why should we tolerate it? I think Krishna is showing you something. It's Dinesh, right?
Divyesh, Prabhuji.
Dinesh, Krishna is showing that because he wants you to do something about it. We live in a world now where people
that would not be considered revenge, is it?
Well, it depends on what the situation is and what's happening. But if you're breaking up something which is harmful to others, how can that be revenge? That's a good thing to do, actually. But then we shouldn't get into, we shouldn't be vendetta. What do you know the modes of material nature? Do you know anything about the modes?
3 modes?
3 modes, yeah. If you get into revenge, that's the mode of passion and ignorance, actually. That will be harmful to others. You see, these things, we have to break something up. You have to use the principle of the British police force.
Okay.
They say that heaven is a place where the police force is British. Because the British are very expert. They're trained in such a way as to use minimum force to break up a situation. So I think that's a good principle for us as well. If we see something which is wrong, we should use minimum force to break it up. Does that resonate?
Sure. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
Are we done?
Hare Krishna, one last question from Ravi Prabhuji, and that's the last question.
Okay, right.
Ravi Prabhuji, he was the first one to join today, so I can't do this injustice to him.
Okay. Ravi?
Ravi Prabhuji? He's unmuted, so
Yeah, he's unmuted, but he's not saying anything.
Prabhuji,
Oh, we've lost him.
Prabhuji, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, go on.
Okay,
Thank you
fine.
very much for hosting me. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. I'll hand over to Path Prabhuji, who will just give you a vote of thanks. Path Prabhuji. Path Prabhuji.
He's
Okay.
not there.
Okay, so we've lost him as well. Okay, let's all unmute ourselves and to glorify Prabhuji. And he gave a wonderful class, and the shower of questions were a witness to his fantastic lesson that we learned today. So kindly unmute and let's chant the Maha Mantra once for him. Hare
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Bol.
Thank you very
Glories to Srila
Thank you.
Prabhupada.
Jai.
Jai.
Shyamananda Krishna
वंशकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः।
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Shyamananda
Glories to
Krishna
Srila Prabhupada.
Krishna.
Jai.
Hare Bol.
Nanda Prabhu. Prahlad was a young one, a 17-year-old, and there was Dwarkadish, who's also there from Canada. He joined. He also
Actually,
grew up
Mataji,
in
it's
front of
16.
me. Oh, 16, sorry. Your mama, okay. Hare Krishna, I'm definitely leaving now. The Dwarkadish, Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Smita
Hare
Mataji, for
Krishna.
joining in at the
Thank you
last moment. Please, whenever you can join us, you know I'm here all the time.
Thank you. Thank you.